Hello everyone. In today's video, I'm going to be doing another unscripted discussion topic where we're going to be discussing who are the top 10 drivers in Formula 1 history. Obviously, this is a contentious topic, so I will say this before we get into the video, these are just my opinions. I don't say that these are fact, I don't say that everyone should agree with me or they're wrong, because I'm not like that. But if you disagree with me, I'd love to see what you say in the comments, because I love interaction, I love hearing people's views and viewpoints, especially when this video is going to attract people of a certain era, and obviously I wasn't around for that era, so they may know things that I don't know, because as much as I look in a statistics book, or as much as I look at encyclopedias, I'm not going to know every single thing about Formula 1, even though I do think that I know quite a bit. So, without further ado, I'm going to get into my top 10 drivers in F1 history. For me, 10th on the list is Sir Jackie Stewart. I mean, this is a good place to start. He's a three-time world champion, pioneered a lot of the safety advancements in Formula 1, and in general, he was just a very, very, very good driver. He has his standout moments, like, for example, in the 1969 German Grand Prix, was it, where he won by 4 minutes in the pouring rain, because he had a photographic memory and he could memorise the circuit, whereas other drivers were guessing where the track was because of the sheer amount of spray and fog of the circuit. But in general, he was just really good. He made his debut with BRM in 1965 and got third in the standings in his first season, which obviously was very good, as BRM was on the downturn by that point. And in general, he was just a very good driver. I don't really remember much of him from the late mid-60s, apart from 1965. He wasn't really... It was quite anonymous, really, until his 1969 title campaign, which he obviously won with Matra, the only championship given to a driver from a team that wasn't from the UK or Italy, which is because obviously Matra was French. Then, obviously, Ken Tyrrell decided to make his own team and run Matra chassis, and Stewart won in 71, and then won in 73, even though he sat out the last race of the season, because obviously Francois Sauver, his teammate, who he really enjoyed being around, he was killed, obviously, in that crash at Watkins Glen. Stewart is just, in general, a legend. Obviously, he retired because of the safety. He just didn't feel it was safe anymore, and he knew that he'd achieved all he wanted to achieve. He knew he'd had 27 Grand Prix wins. He knew he'd had 3 World Championships. He knew that he was going to be remembered as one of the legends of the sport. Obviously, he had his Stewart Grand Prix team that had him. I mean, this is not to do with him being a top 10 driver, but he also had his Stewart Grand Prix team, or Stewart's Grand Prix team, and he was just a legend in general. Like, you see him on the grid, and you instantly think, yeah, that's Jackie Stewart. You think, oh, yep, let's see what he thinks about a certain topic in Formula 1, because he'll always give you an interesting answer. Obviously, newer fans don't really know much about him, but they will remember him at Miami, was it 2023? Where he tried to get Roger Federer to do an interview with Sky Sports, and all the Miami security people who have the F1 knowledge of a fucking bat decided to go, no, you're not allowed in. He was like, well, yes, I fucking am, because I drove in the 60s and I'm a fucking rebel, and you're not. You're just a random American cunt. And yeah, you got Roger Federer to do an interview with Sky Sports. That was brilliant. That was some brilliant television. But yeah, Jackie Stewart is a really stand-up guy, and also one of the greatest drivers in F1 history. I mean, on track, but obviously, as I said, his stand-up performances were obviously the 1969 German Grand Prix, the first one that comes to mind. He won, was it the 1971, or was it 1969 as well, the Spanish Grand Prix that he won by 2 laps? That was obviously at Montjuic Park, which is obviously a difficult-ish circuit. I have driven that circuit before on some games, and it is quite a difficult circuit to drive. It's like Monaco, but a bit more spacious, but still, it was a very good win. Obviously, to win by 2 laps on any circuit is amazing. So yeah, he's 10th on my list. 9th on my list is Graham Hill. Graham Hill, for me, is one of the most underrated champions in F1 history. People forget about him because everyone thinks, when they think of that era, they think of Jim Clark, and they think of Jack Brabham, and they think of, or actually, they do think of Graham Hill probably third to those two. But he, for me, is very underrated because people just don't realise, well, first of all, he had amazing longevity, and second of all, he's probably the only person who could beat Jim Clark on his day. On merit as well. I mean, obviously, to expand on the longevity point, he started his career in 1958 when Fangio was still on the grid. Admittedly, he was only doing a part-time campaign, but Fangio was still on the grid. And he stayed through. Admittedly, he was going a bit part-time towards the end of his career. And he wasn't really the same driver after his leg break in Watkins Glen in 1969. But he stayed until 1975 when he was, 46 years old? Yeah, because he was born in 1929, so yes, he would have been 46 in 1975. He obviously retired after he failed to qualify for the Monaco Grand Prix, which he'd won 5 times, and he was like, yeah, if I can't qualify at Monaco when I won here 5 times before, I know I'm not at the same level I was before. Graham Hill, for me, as I said, he won at Monaco 5 times, only beaten by Senna. He stopped Jim Clark from ever getting a win at Monaco. He was genuinely one of, if not the most dominant driver at Monaco. He was part of that podium, wasn't he, in 1968, where we had 2 one-time podium finishers with Lucien Bianchi and Richard Atwood, who only ever got on the podium once, and it was in that Grand Prix. So there was some high-profile retirements in that race. But yeah, Graham Hill, as I said, he started his career with what? Cooper? Or I should probably do some research for this, but either Cooper or Lotus in 1958. And then he moved to BRM around, I think it might have been 1961, 1960. I mean, obviously, he won his first championship with BRM in 1962 and looked very good throughout that season. I mean, Jim Clark was obviously around there. He wasn't at his peak yet, but he was there. John Surtees was there. Ferrari were in a bit of a... They'd just gone downhill because of the whole ATS rebel movement, so they'd lost Phil Hill, and obviously they lost Von Trips the previous year because he died. So that 1962 championship was a bit of a filler championship. It was a bit of a... F1 was in a transition period, and he just so happened to be in a decent car and was a very good driver. 1963, I don't remember much about that season, apart from obviously Jim Clark absolutely wiping the floor with everyone and getting 100% of the points that season. 1964, I think Hill was in the title fight. And he went to the last race of the season in Mexico, and then was it Lorenzo Bandini smashed into him, crashed him out, which was probably... Apparently, there were rumours that obviously Bandini was John Surtees' Ferrari teammate. So there were rumours that Lorenzo Bandini took him out on purpose so that Surtees could win the championship. But we'll never know if that's true, because obviously everyone involved is dead now, and has been for quite a few years. But yeah, 1964 was obviously good. 65, he moved to Lotus. Was it 64 he moved to Lotus? Actually, it might have been. 65 though, I remember, because obviously he was Jim Clark's teammate when he won the title, and I think he get the win at Monaco, because obviously Clark missed the Monaco Grand Prix to do the Indy 500. Obviously Graham was the best at Monaco. 1966 and 67 were really bad years for Lotus. Obviously Clark won a few races because Clark is Clark and he'll do anything. Obviously Hill had no, because obviously Clark was just the kind of driver who was so smooth. Hill was a bit more aggressive, so he had more reliability problems. Then obviously he won 1968, rallied the team around him after Jim Clark's death, which is obviously very commendable. Yeah, 1968 was a very good season for him. And 1969 was going well. He won at Monaco, and then he had his double leg break at Watkins Glen, which basically killed off his competitive career in terms of fighting for world championships. He kind of moved around after that. I don't think he drove for Lotus in 1970. I think he came back with Brabham in 71 or 72. And then made his own team. He made his own Team Embassy Hill for 73. And he had Tony Bryce under his wing. And Tony Bryce was going to become one of the best young drivers in the world. And then obviously they had that plane crash in November or October 1975. Or was it December? It might late 1975, and they all died. Or not all of them died. I think everyone on the plane died, but they had to shut down the Hill team because most of the team members were on that plane. And obviously Tony Bryce was killed, Graham Hill was killed. Two drivers. One driver had a lot of potential, and one driver who had lots of legendary status. And that Graham Hill's death in that plane crash obviously had a knock-on effect for his son, Damon. Obviously, he hadn't registered the plane that he was flying, or he hadn't done some paperwork or something, so he was flying illegally, basically. And so when he died, all the insurance companies basically took all his family fortune. And so Damon had to start his career from scratch, or as if he wasn't the son of a world champion. And so he had to go onto bikes, and he couldn't really use the fact that his dad was world champion as a way to get into motorsport, because he didn't have the money that would come with that. Like, for example, what you see with Mick Schumacher, obviously his dad had a ton of money that he just passed down, and so that's how he could pursue his racing career. And also because he's Mick Schumacher. I mean, nowadays names carry a lot more weight than they used to, because there's a lot less of a meritocracy now than it was back in the 70s. But yeah, Graham Hill for me is very underrated. He's not the best in the world, he's not top 5 for me, but he is definitely up there, and I think most people forget about him because, as I said, they think of Jim Clark, they think of Jackie Stewart, that's another one I forgot, Jack Brabham. They often don't think of him at all. Number 8 on my list is a newer example, Fernando Alonso. Fernando Alonso, for me, is one of the most versatile and plug-in-and-play drivers I've ever seen. Obviously came onto the grid in 2001 for Minardi. Actually got beat by Tarso Marquez in the driver standings in that year, because I think Tarso got a 9th place at an attritional race, and Alonso only got a 10th or something like that. But obviously, he wasn't worse than Tarso Marquez that season. He just lost in terms of not actually having the luck to be finishing an attritional race. I mean, I don't really remember any flashes of brilliance from that season because I haven't really watched 2001. It's not really one of the seasons I watched because there wasn't really many big moments. There was Hakkinen in Spain retiring on the last lap. There was a couple of others. Obviously, Hakkinen actually winning his last race, and Montoya winning his first race at Monza after 9/11. Yeah, Alonso really didn't have it. Obviously, he had a standout campaign because Renault signed him up after that, or Flavio Briatore signed him up. Obviously, sat out 2002 because he was Renault's test driver, and they wanted to integrate him into the main team. Then 2003 showed his skill, won in Hungary, got his first win at Hungary, and beat Trulli. Then in 2004, actually Trulli was beating him, and then the Italian got replaced by Jacques Villeneuve because he let Rubens Barrichello through at the French Grand Prix. Obviously, Renault French, they're going to want to have a good result at the French Grand Prix, and so him getting overtaken was a bit embarrassing for them, and so Flav got rid of him because he didn't like that. And so Trulli signed for Toyota. I'm not sure if he'd already signed for Toyota for 2005 at that point, or if it was just a convenience thing for Flavio so he could get him out early. So and then we're going to 2005, obviously Fernando's championship winning year, or first championship winning year anyway. He was very good. I mean, he had who did he have as a... Oh, he had Raikkonen. Raikkonen was his main title rival that year. I mean, Schumacher had a good race at Imola and looked like he was an early titles contender, and everyone realised that the Ferrari was nowhere near what it was in 2004. Obviously, as I said, he had Fisichella as his teammate, and Fisichella was just a bit shit, I won't lie. He only got one win. I can't remember. He got the win in the opening round at Australia and then didn't really do anything apart from that. Was it 2005 or 2006 where the iconic radio message, "Oh, come on, Fissy, you're 2 seconds slower than Fernando"? I assume it wasn't in 2005 because obviously Fissy won. He's not going to be 2 seconds slower and winning. But yeah, Fernando was really good in 2005. Better so in 06, I think, because obviously he had Schumacher as his title rival, and Schumacher obviously was in a car that was... I mean, I think that Ferrari was obviously a little bit worse than the Renault because everyone thinks of the Renault, they don't think of the Ferrari. But that's because I suppose 2004 Ferrari was obviously a bigger car and a better car. But yeah, he beat Schumacher, which is obviously not many people can do that. 2007 moved to McLaren. Bad move for him because he went into a team that Hamilton was obviously going to be favoured in. Lewis Hamilton was obviously going to be favoured in that 2007 McLaren team, even though he was a rookie. Alonso did well. People obviously talk about Hamilton's rookie campaign, but Alonso did well as well. He got a couple of race wins. If he didn't go into the gravel trap at Spain and Canada, it would have definitely helped him out, but he did do those things, so you can't really say it wasn't his fault because it definitely was his fault. He had a couple of bad mistakes. I remember, was it Fuji where he just speared off into the barriers while Lewis went on to win? He speared off the barriers while leading. He had a couple of moments, obviously. As I said, in Spain and Canada, he was too busy focusing on putting some manners on Lewis. He put some manners on himself by going off into the gravel. And I think if those two hadn't been taking points off each other the entire season, they'd have won the drivers' standings, at least with one of them. I think Lewis had the better season in 2007, but Alonso was also up there. He also had his moments that were proving why he was a very good driver. 2008, obviously moved back to Renault. I think him moving back to Renault wasn't him trying to win a championship again with them. I think it was him going for a stopgap before he moved to another big team in 2009 or 2010. Obviously, we saw it was 2010 with Ferrari. Showed his potential, obviously, won in Singapore in controversial circumstances, then won in Fuji in uncontroversial circumstances. I think that was obviously a good result for him. You have to give it to him that he won in Singapore in a car that wasn't very good, and you have to also give it to him that he won in Fuji in circumstances that didn't revolve around race fixing. 2009, he couldn't really do anything. That Renault was absolutely dog shit. Nelson Piquet Jr., obviously he's not going to be senior, is it? But Nelson Piquet Jr. obviously wasn't on his level, and neither was Grosjean. I don't think either of them got any points in both 2009 and in 2009, sorry. Admittedly, Grosjean was a rookie, and Nelson Piquet Jr. was just Nelson Piquet Jr., just a bit average, really. But Alonso, he got pole in Hungary, didn't he? And imagine getting pole in a 2009 Renault. You've got to be good to do that. 2010 obviously went to Ferrari, and Ferrari, he had some great seasons at Ferrari. 2010, he was practically flawless throughout the entire of 2010. I can't exactly remember any time he made any mistakes, but I know someone's going to point one out in the comments. He had Australia, where he spun out at the start. I don't remember. Was it because I remember he had the crash that he had, or the spin that he had, was because of Button. Was it that Button went up his inside and he just couldn't see because the mirrors were so small on those cars that he just couldn't see that he was on his inside, and so he turned in on him and he kind of spun himself out? I mean, I'm trying to think of other things that happened that year. Obviously, he had a couple of good wins. Singapore, he got his only Grand Slam by just holding off Vettel for the entire race. Yeah, he had a good 2010, obviously. Lost out on the title by, 4 points in the end? 5 points in the end? Something stupid like that. Yeah, I think, obviously, he had bad luck, but so did Vettel, so did Webber. That 2010 season had so many what-ifs. No one had a perfect season. No one had an even near perfect season. If someone had just had more luck, they could have just, anyone from the top 3 teams, so Hamilton, Button, Vettel, Webber, and maybe Alonso, obviously not Massa, because he wasn't really in the title fight post, Spain. If any of those had had more luck, they could have taken the title in 2010. 2011, he was really good. He obviously got 2 wins. Did he get one in Spain? Or yeah, that was getting into his era. Obviously, he'd always been good at race starts, but he was getting into his era of really good race starts. Obviously, in Canada, he got unlucky because Button twatted him off in probably one of... People say, oh my God, it was the greatest comeback ever, Canada 2011 for Jenson Button. Yeah, taking out 2 drivers, getting a drive-through penalty, and only being able to win because your strategy was so audacious because you were right at the back of the field. Oh, wow, that's such a great comeback. Again, I commend Jenson for his drive in terms of actual pace that day, but he crashed out a ton of people, and people say it was the greatest comeback. It was the greatest terrorism act, I could say, in Canadian Grand Prix history, until George Russell cooked something up probably for the 2024 race. 2012, Ferrari, Alonso, one of the best seasons. 2012 is a year I started watching Formula One. I think my first race I remember watching was Brazil, but I know that I watched races before then. I watched Belgium because I remember talking to my dad about the fact that Grosjean was getting replaced by D'Ambrosio. Silverstone rings a bell in my head. But yeah, no one cares about when I actually started watching F1. So 2012, it was great. He won that race in Sepang, and he was like, "Oh, you're so beautiful, you're so beautiful." Perfect impression. Obviously, I mean, yeah, he was good in that 2012 Ferrari in that race, but obviously the weather did put into play the fact that Ferrari wasn't as bad in the wet as it was in the dry. Hence why he got his only pole positions in the wet. I think it was at Germany. And did he get one at Silverstone as well in the wet, or was that in the dry? I know the race was wet and then dry, but was the qualifying? I don't remember if the qualifying session was wet or dry. I don't think anyone really cares, to be honest. His win in Valencia was very good. Came from 11th to the 1st. Yes, he had Vettel fall off the track. Grosjean fell off the track. Hamilton blew himself up. Maldonado blew himself up as usual. Yeah, that was a really interesting season for him. I mean, his save in Brazil was one of the best. Everyone's seen the clip of him saving the car and stopping it from veering off into the abyss of death, and that was amazing. 2013, Fernando, I mean, he was much better than Massa, as usual, as he was for his entire Ferrari stint. He won in Spain and China, and obviously Spain was his last win. I mean, he could still win a race now, but it would be very unlikely, in my opinion. 2014 really showed why he was one of the most adaptable drivers in F1. That Ferrari was dog shit, and he still wrangled it around the track and got loads of good results. I think he tripled Raikkonen's points tally that year. Something stupid like that, or at least doubled it. I know he at least doubled it. He might have not tripled it, but he at least doubled it. And I think that really shows. It was a mix of Raikkonen being really shit and really unadaptable, and Alonso being really adaptable that really accentuated the gap between the two in that car. Obviously, Alonso was unhappy with how he'd been treated, or he was unhappy that Ferrari hadn't provided him with a championship. Well, I mean, he had provided him with a championship-winning car in 2010, you could say, but most of his good results were down to himself and not down to the car. 2015 moved to McLaren. The whole McLaren stint was just him being good, but his car being dog shit. Was it 2015 or 2016? I think it was 2016 when Jenson actually beat him in the standings, because Jenson had a good race in Austria. I remember he qualified like 3rd in Austria, and he got like 5th in COTA because he overtook like 50 million cars in the opening lap. But Alonso was very good in his McLaren campaign. Obviously, there was a couple of red herrings. He got fastest lap, I think, at the 2016 race, despite being in a McLaren Honda at Monza, which was like, how? How have you got fastest lap in a McLaren Honda around Monza? 2018 obviously had that red herring in Australia. I mean, people were hyped up that McLaren were now going to be good at McLaren and Alonso was going to be good, but I think that was his best result all season. 2019, obviously he took the break after 2018, he had enough. Went to get the Triple Crown of Motorsport, won Le Mans, couldn't win the Indy 500 despite leading it and being very impressive throughout. Before anyone says that the Indianapolis 500 isn't, you don't have to be good to win the Indy 500, you do. It's a mix of being in a good team and a mix of good luck. Obviously, people say, oh, Marcus Ericsson won it, so it's clearly not that good, but yeah, I mean, there's a fair point. Like, maybe some years don't look good on the Indy 500, but like Michael Schumacher said, it was too dangerous. Those drivers are definitely more gladiators than F1 drivers are nowadays, in terms of the old 70s and 80s old drivers, as opposed to be putting themselves on the line of nearly dying. I mean, they're going 240 miles an hour in some cases. Like, you have a crash at that speed, you're going to die, regardless of what safety's in. But luckily they don't have crashes at those speeds, because that's usually in qualifying. They're not usually on the edge of grip in qualifying, they're usually very safe on terms of setups. Away from the Indy 500, he obviously went to try and get the Triple Crown of Motorsport, failed one of the hurdles. I think when he retires from F1, he might try and go back to Indy, try and get that title, because I think it does mean a lot to him. Obviously 2021, came back and was instantly on the pace of Ocon. That was what I was worried about. I was worried that he was going to come back and not be able to get on the pace instantly, but he did get on the pace instantly. He was faster than Ocon in most circumstances, if not on his level. He wasn't. I don't think he had any particularly shit races in terms of him just being really bad. Obviously, he had his moment. He had Qatar, where he got his first podium since 2014, and everyone loved that because he was a wily old fox that year. He had Hungary, where everyone was like, wow, this guy can still race at the age of... He was 40 back then. This guy can still race, and this guy can still be clever like he was back in the day. Obviously, he had his moments like Canada 2013, where he was playing DRS chicken with Hamilton before DRS chicken was a thing, before it became popular in like 2021, 2022. And then you've got like 2022, he obviously had the front row start in Canada, had a couple of other good moments. He had Australia, where he was looking like he was going to get pole. Was that 2023? Oh no, it wasn't 2023. Obviously, it wasn't. A stupid question, because he wasn't at Alpine in 2023. But then 2023 moved to Aston Martin, had a very good start to the season. He was the guy everyone was rooting for, because he just didn't want Verstappen to win, really. And everyone liked what they saw. Unless you're a Hamilton fan, you liked what you saw. You liked seeing him fight for the lead. You just liked seeing him fight with Lewis and mug him off at Bahrain. You like seeing him nearly beat Verstappen in qualifying at Monaco. But then the car fell off and it was just a bit of shit. Alonso is obviously one of the most well-rounded drivers. I mean, the only reason he's not higher up is because a lot of the reasons why he didn't get championships, although a lot of reasons for why he didn't get more championships is because he had unlucky cars or he had not good enough cars. A lot of reasons why he didn't get championships are also because he was just not good in himself. If he'd have not burnt bridges at McLaren, if he'd have not burnt bridges at Ferrari, he'd have not burnt bridges at Renault or Alpine or whatever, I think he could have had more championships. He could have definitely had at least 5 if he'd have been a bit less of a Mardy cunt off track, but that's what my dad used to always call him. He used to call him Mardy. I mean, kind of true, but yeah, I mean, he could have definitely made himself look a bit better than he actually was as a person. Yeah, that's who's 8th. 7th. Right, this one is going to ruffle some feathers. I know it is. For me, Lewis Hamilton is the 7th best driver of all time. Now, a lot of people go, he's a 7-time champion, you can't do that. But I can, because you'll see every driver above him has hardly ever been beaten by a teammate. If not, they have never been beaten by a teammate. You'll see who they are. Lewis is in that weird phase where he's so successful. Most wins, most pole positions, most podiums probably. One of the most experienced drivers in F1 history. Has had some of the best performances, obviously, like Silverstone 2008. One is like the biggest winning margin for 30 years, and I think it is still I don't think we've had a bigger winning margin since 2008. At his peak, Lewis is one of the top 5 drivers of all time, and I'll happily say that, probably top 3. But over the course of a season, sometimes he struggles. I mean, the way I like to put it is like he's a more successful version of Damon Hill. Like, his peak is amazing. He can drive, when he really puts his mind to it, he can drive better than anyone else. But most of the time, he's not driving better than anyone else. Like, you look, obviously, 2007, rookie year, comes in, and he's immediately on Alonso's pace. That was very good. I will give it to him that. Obviously, he bottled it in China, but you didn't expect him to even be in that position to start with as a rookie. So, that was amazing. I will say that was amazing. 2008 was very good as well. I mean, 2008, he could have definitely done himself a few favours by not crashing into Raikkonen at Canada. He could have definitely done himself a favour by, I mean, you could say a lot, Massa was unlucky as well, but that's not Lewis's fault. 2009, obviously, first half of the season, McLaren was dog shit. Second half of the season, the car got better, so he got better. Some people say, obviously, he was amazing to get the results he did in that McLaren in 2009. But I disagree. I think that the fact he went from, I think he was what, 16th in the Hockenheim race, and then a race later at Hungary he was just winning. You can't say that's just down to him, or you can't say that's not completely down to the car improving, because you don't go, even as a driver, if your car improves to the point where it's like, the car obviously massively improved when they got the double diffuser working, and I'm not going to take anything away from him, because I'm not saying he doesn't deserve those wins, because he absolutely does, but he obviously also he destroyed Kovalainen in 2008 and 2009. Like, Kovalainen got one win, Lewis had about 75 billion. And Lewis challenged for both titles. He challenged for the title in 08. Kovalainen was nowhere near. In 2009, I don't think Kovalainen even got a podium, while Lewis got like 2 wins. So, obviously, Lewis in 2009 and 2008 was quite good. 2010 was just unlucky for all of the big contenders. No, as I said in my Elio, did I say it in my Elio De Angelis video, or did I say it in the Alonso section? Lewis had an unlucky season. Obviously, no one really had none of the top 5 drivers had a perfect season. None of them whatsoever, at all, ever. And Lewis, I mean, he looked like he was challenging for the title. Obviously, had some bad luck in Spain and a couple of other races as well. But again, you could say Webber had bad luck in Korea. You could say he had bad luck in Turkey. You could say Vettel had bad luck in Turkey. You could say Vettel had bad luck when he crashed, when he had other problems. You could say Button had a problem in Monaco where he had a fucking radiator bug in his, or whatever it was, in his side pod. Alonso had a couple of other bad. He had Petrov in Abu Dhabi. He had a lot of other problems that Alonso had. But you know what I mean? No driver in that 2010 season, at least in the title fight, had a perfect season. And that showed in how exciting it was. 2011, that was probably Lewis's worst season, if I'm being honest, on pure performance. He got destroyed. Not destroyed. Destroyed is a harsh word, because he still won a couple of races. He got beaten considerably by Jenson Button. Jenson came second and Lewis came, 5th in the standings. Lewis was too busy crashing with Massa every other race to actually get any sort of momentum. And yeah, he was just not that good. I think people were starting to question whether he was really that good a driver at that sort of time. And then 2012 came along and he proved that he was still capable of winning the title, but his car wasn't anymore. Obviously, the 2012 McLaren was the best car over one lap, but it just retired too often to be able to get him to do a title run. He obviously retired in Singapore, retired in Abu Dhabi, retired in Spa, where it was completely not his fault that he retired. He had Valencia, where it wasn't his fault that he retired. He had I'll go back on that, because I think that the incident with Maldonado in 2012 Valencia was Lewis's fault. Maldonado got the penalty, but Lewis forced him out wide because McLaren Lewis was a menace. He wasn't dirty per se. He was just an absolute menace. He was like what Verstappen is now. People, obviously, you get Hamilton fans nowadays who go, Verstappen's so dirty. He crashes into people and he's a maniac. Not realizing that that's exactly what Lewis was in his McLaren days. Yeah, but that's the thing. Like 2012 Valencia, Lewis pushes someone off the circuit and then is surprised when they want to re-enter the circuit. And obviously, yes, you could say Maldonado could have cut the corner and maybe rejoined a safer avenue. But he was still sort of in the hunt. They were still side by side, and I think that Lewis really underestimated where Maldonado was, and I think he should have, used his eyes. I mean, that's always good. And he should have not forced him off in the first place, because I think he literally just forced him off because he could force him off, not because they ran out of space or whatever. And obviously, Maldonado got beached on a curb and launched into him. Obviously, but Maldonado got the penalty, but I still think that was Lewis's fault. 2013. I think he beat Nico in the standings, didn't he? Although Nico got 2 wins to Lewis's 1. Obviously, Nico got one at Monaco, and where was the other track he got his win? Was it Spain? Or was it... No. Was it Canada? Or was it Spain? Or was it something completely different? Oh, was it... No, it was Silverstone, wasn't it? Because Lewis had his tyre blowout from a lead. Yeah, I think obviously Lewis did good in that year. And 2014 he was good as well. 2015 he was great as well. Like 2014, 2015, there were 2... 2015 was one of his best seasons. He completely he beat Rosberg by 75 points or something in the end. I mean, he beat Rosberg by 66 points in 2014, but that was only because Rosberg did shit in the last round in Abu Dhabi and it was double points, so it really exacerbated the gap when it probably should have been about 30 points and it was about 60 instead. 2016, Lewis was the better driver than Nico, but Nico still deserved that title. Nico just had ruthless consistency, and Lewis wasn't as consistent, but his peaks were kind of better. He had races like Silverstone, he had races like, I'm trying to think of other races where he was really, really good. I can't actually think of any, that's bad of me. I should have done more research, but yeah, I think Lewis was the better driver in 2016, but Nico was the more consistent driver, and that's what got him the championship. You could say, yes, oh, well, Malaysia, but you could also say Spain, which, to be fair, I think that was a racing incident, but you could throw it either way and say, well, actually, Nico also had some bad luck, Lewis had some bad luck, and Nico had some bad luck. It swings and roundabouts. Yeah, 2017, obviously, had the initial title battle with Vettel, but then Ferrari and Vettel fell off in the second half of the season, but it's not Lewis's fault, so he got the title deservedly. Same with 2018. Lewis got the title and Vettel fell off, and it wasn't really Lewis's fault that Vettel fell off, obviously, so he deserves that title again. 2019, yeah, Lewis was, he wasn't a class above the field. There were races where he was outmatched, like Canada, where Vettel obviously got that egregious penalty. People say, oh, that was one of the races where Vettel was robbed. I don't think he was robbed. I think that it was a deserved penalty. Like, people say, oh, well, how do you expect Vettel to have grip on the grass? I don't expect him to have grip on the grass. I just expect him not to go into the grass in the first place. I think if you don't want to get penalised, he didn't intentionally block him, but he still blocked him. It's like if you're on a qualifying lap and you block someone accidentally because you didn't see them coming, you don't not get a penalty because you didn't see them coming. If you have a massive slide and, let's say, take someone out of your qualifying, let's say if two drivers are running back to back, they never would be because you'd lose time, but if two drivers are running back to back, one of them loses control and, like, spins out and then spears into the other driver, they'd probably get a penalty for that because you've ruined another driver's qualifying from your mistake. But the thing is, they go, oh, you can't do that in this situation because it was Vettel got robbed. No, he didn't. He went over, they say, oh, yeah, you can't expect him to have the same grip over the grass that he would on racetrack. Yeah, well, just don't go on the grass in the first place. Don't make the mistake and you don't get the problem. I'm not saying Vettel did it intentionally. I'm not saying it was malicious. I'm not saying anything about Seb, but it was still his fault and he should have been penalised for it, in my opinion. 2020, Lewis had one of his best seasons. I mean, the biggest example of that was Turkey. He was winning the race while Bottas was spinning, 5-6 times. And overall, Lewis was just very, very, very good in 2020. And then in 2021, he had Verstappen to compete with, and I think he was shocked. I think Hamilton versus Verstappen would be like if Senna came against Senna. I'm trying to think of two other aggressive drivers. They're both just as aggressive as each other. I think he was just surprised with how much Verstappen took it to him. He hadn't had a proper title fight since 2016. And I think he was surprised. And also, you look at, like, Rosberg was never highly hyper-aggressive. Neither was Massa when he was fighting for his title. Alonso was hyper-aggressive. He was aggressive, but he wasn't to the level that Max is. I'm not holding it against Max by any stretch of the imagination because I think that Max's aggression 95% of the time is good for the sport and it's good racing, good fair racing. Like, he does step over the mark sometimes, but you can say the same about Lewis. Obviously, you saw Bahrain. Max probably should have won that race, but that's racing. He should have let Lewis at a better place. That's racing. He should have known what he was doing. Imola, Lewis obviously had that bit where he was stuck in the barriers and got saved by the red flag caused by George Russell being a terrorist. But again, that's racing. There was a couple of early parts of that season. Baku, obviously, he had that massive lockup and lost himself a lot of ground. Silverstone, which is obviously, I mean, if anyone says that wasn't Lewis's fault, you're just brain dead. I'm not sure if it's satire, but I always see those pictures of people. You know how, for those who know the mobile game Score Hero, you know how you can draw a line from the football to the goal and you, like, curve it a lot. That's what people were doing. People were saying that Verstappen should have followed the full outside line. He should have literally ran along the white line on the cops and just ran the outside of the white line, not realising that if you did that, you'd be driving at like 70 miles an hour. People just expect Verstappen to give him more than half the track. Obviously, I'm not going to say it was on purpose. I'm not going to say it was a conspiracy theory against Red Bull and they were trying to murder him, because he wasn't. That's just stupid. Anyone who genuinely believes that needs to be thrown into a pit and killed. I'm probably going to edit that bit out, or at least change it. I'll actually reword that bit. Anyone who thinks that Lewis Hamilton was attempting to murder Verstappen in Silverstone needs to just not have a mouth. But yeah, then he had a couple of moments like Jeddah. Jeddah was just in general just a really shit race. Jeddah was just a really bad race, in my opinion. I think that brought out the worst in both Max and Lewis. Lewis was dirty, Max was dirty. Max, I don't think Max brake checked him on purpose. I don't think Lewis ran into the back of him on purpose. I don't think, because people go, well, Max clearly put on his brakes way too much and he tried to do it on purpose. No, he didn't. He was just slowing down to try and let Lewis through, and Lewis wasn't going past him. So it was like, oh, let's slow down some more, not realising that Lewis was right behind him. And Lewis was like, why is he slowing down? He's clearly trying to get DRS chicken. I don't blame either of them for that kind of brake check or running into the back of him fiasco, because the FIA should have done way more. The FIA should have been on the phone to both teams going, you're going to give the position back here, and this is how you're going to do it. Charlie Whiting would have done that. Michael Massey didn't. Obviously, Abu Dhabi, Lewis lost that title. It was unfair. Yes, I had this argument with someone in my Lewis Hamilton move to Ferrari stupid video, and they said, oh, but it was fixed. No, it wasn't fixed. Michael Massey just didn't know how to handle two team principals going at him and telling him how to run the race. See, if that was, as I said again, if that was Charlie Whiting, he'd go, shut up, both of you, let me make my decision. But Michael Massey didn't know how to tell Jonathan Wheatley and Toto Wolff to shut up and stop being fucking dickheads, trying to get him to influence the race. I'm probably going to edit that out again, because I think if I do too much swearing, I'll probably get demonetised. But, not demonetised, because I don't have monetisation yet, but I want to. I don't want to alienate people, but yeah, 2021, Lewis was good, but Max was better overall. I think he deserved the title, because people say, oh, well, Max performed better, so therefore he deserved the title more than Lewis. No, I think they both deserve the title. They both went at it, and I think in different circumstances they both could have won the title, and I think that, for me, is why they both equally deserved that title. 2022, Lewis was not at it. Probably an after effect of losing the title in 2021. I bet it was probably a hint of him that wanted revenge and wanted to fight back against the authorities, but he hadn't got the car to do that, so it didn't work out for him. Obviously had to do the experimental setups, got beat by George quite considerably, actually. As I said, he had experimental setups, so that can probably account for half the deficit, but the other half, towards the end of the season, even then, he was losing out to George. 2023, obviously, to be fair, he did get his shit together in 2023. He did get his shit together in 2023 and beat George. It wasn't considerably, and again, it's George Russell. It's not like... George Russell is a very good driver, but he's not a generational talent. He's not a Max Verstappen. He is like probably, to compare him to drivers of yesteryear, let's think of someone, probably a Nick Heidfeld. Maybe a bit better than that, actually. Maybe probably I'm trying to think of a driver from like the 90s or the 80s that I can compare him to. A Michele Alboreto type, a Riccardo Patrese type. I think he'll be a very experienced top-level driver. Gerhard Berger, maybe, is a better example. I don't think he's going to be a championship caliber. He's a championship caliber driver if he gets in the best car, but I don't think he's going to be championship caliber if he's got the odds stacked against him. And another point with Lewis is that, as I said, he got beaten by his teammates more than all of the drivers above him. He got beat by Alonso in 2007. Admittedly, he was a rookie, so that was maybe unfair on him to say that. 2011, got beat by Button, and despite the fact that Lewis had been in the team longer and he had all that sort of stuff going for him. 2016 got beaten by Nico Rosberg, Nico Rosberg was not a championship level driver before he got into that 2014 Mercedes. He was an upper midfield kind of stalwart. He was, again, a Nick Heidfeld. It would have been like if Michael Schumacher hadn't broke his leg in 1999, it would have been like Irvine beating Schumacher in 1999, or Irvine staying on in 2000 and beating Schumacher. It would have been like Barrichello beating Schumacher at some point. That's why Lewis goes down in my rankings. Not because he's a bad driver, not because he's a best car merchant, because he is a bit of a best car merchant, but most drivers are doing their best stuff in their best car. So, look at like Graham Hill, Jackie Stewart. Graham Hill in his Embassy Hill car was nowhere. Jackie Stewart from like 66 to 68 was nowhere. Fernando Alonso in the McLaren Honda was nowhere because they weren't in the best car. But people still use that argument against Lewis. So yeah, I think I've been fair with Lewis. Obviously, people are going to disagree. People are going to say, how can you not put him in the top 5? How can you not put him in the top 3? How can you not put him number 1? But I disagree. I think I've given my opinions very fairly towards Lewis. More so than I think other people would. 6th, I'd put Ayrton Senna. Ayrton Senna for me is 6th place. See, obviously, people are going to go, why is he behind Prost? Because, let's go through his career. 1984, he had Tolman. He had Stefan Johansson as his teammate, and I think he had, who was his other teammate? Was it Teo Farby or Johnny Cicotto or something like that? Again, not the greatest of drivers. Stefan Johansson was, but Teo Fabi and not Teo Fabi. Johnny Cecotto was Johnny Cecotto. It wasn't Teo Fabi. Why do I keep it? It's because Teo Fabi was Tom in '85. But they just weren't the greatest of drivers. Obviously, Senna, he did great in Monaco, deserved a win probably. But obviously, his car was still he was gonna have problems because obviously he had broken the suspension in that race. Got a couple of other podiums that year, but obviously everyone only remembers Monaco. He got one in, I think it was Italy and somewhere else. Portugal, did he also get a podium? Moved to Lotus in 1985. I mean, he didn't completely embarrass De Angelis, like I said in my De Angelis video, or in my De Angelis video. That's literally my most recent video. But then 1986, stayed with Lotus, had Johnny Dumfries as his teammate because he refused to let them have Derek Warwick because he thought that they'd favour Warwick because he was a British driver in a British team, which is, I suppose that's fair enough. Obviously, he beat Dumfries because Dumfries, I think he had no F1 experience. I think he was an IndyCar driver, or at least he was a young kind of upcoming driver. I think Dumfries scored like 1 point, and Senna obviously got quite a few wins that season. 1987, I mean, that was the lowest point probably of Lotus's, and his time with Lotus, obviously. They decided to get him the Honda engines, got Satoru Nakajima in the other seat, because obviously, for some reason, I don't know why did Honda and Yamaha and all the other Japanese engine suppliers decide that if you had a Japanese driver in your team, you'd get like discounted or free engines? I don't see why they did that. Obviously, I mean, there's obviously, I mean, nowadays, if like, for example, George Russell went to Williams and they gave Williams discounted Mercedes engines, I don't know why they do that. I don't know why they did it to the extent that Honda and Yamaha did it, because obviously now it's just commonplace. But back in the day, I mean, you could see, like, Renault would often do it with, like, French drivers, but you wouldn't see it to the level it did, like, for example, McLaren having... Sorry, not McLaren, Ligier getting... Was it Yamaha for 95? Or was it Honda for 90? It was Mugen Honda, that's it. Mugen Honda for 95, and they brought in Aguri Suzuki to do half the races when they had Martin Brundle in the other car, and surprise, surprise, Aguri Suzuki did shit. Because he wasn't that good a driver. I mean, he got a podium in Belarus, but come on. Anyway, what I'm waffling on, this is about Lewis, not about... Oh, sorry, it's about Senna. I've moved on to Senna, haven't I? Whoops. Yeah, I mean, Senna obviously had that Lotus. I mean, it did good on even on street circuits, which is where the turbos are less effective because they're of turbo lag and all that sort of stuff. Moved to McLaren in '88. Obviously outperformed Alain Prost. I mean, he wasn't miles ahead of him. I mean, he was in Monaco, but apart from that, he wasn't miles ahead of him. He wasn't embarrassing him. Was that the season where Prost had 105 points and Senna had, 94, and he would have won the title if it had been a normal point system? I mean, a couple of years ago, I used to think that, oh, well, you play the game how it's played. You know there's a drop scores at the start of the season. But I was like, if we're talking about actual, like, who's the best driver out of the two? Being a driver is not just about being a mathematician, it's about actually getting the results race after race. Because obviously, I mean, Senna won by being faster, but in shorter bursts. And essentially, he would get first, fifth, sixth, first. That's just an example. Whereas Prost would get second, first, second. That's just an example. Like, Senna would get better results, but less often. And that worked for that type of system, but you couldn't guarantee that would happen. Because obviously, let's say you get first, fifth, and then you get 5 retirements on the bounce because the engine reliability wasn't that great back then. You're screwed because you're not going to be able to get up to the upper threshold of the points system. But yeah, I mean, obviously Senna won that in '88. He lost in '89 in unfair circumstances. Even though I can say that Prost was a better driver in my opinion, I still think it was unfair that Senna lost the '89 title. I mean, you could also say that he would, even if he didn't get screwed over in Suzuka, he would have probably been unlikely that he won the title because I think he would have literally needed Prost to retire from both races and for him to win both races. Obviously, Prost retired in Suzuka, but I don't think he retired in Adelaide. I think Senna obviously retired in Adelaide. I think it would have been very wishful thinking to assume that he was going to win that title. 1990, I mean, Senna got his retribution against Prost, which is fair game because Prost did it in Suzuka. I think Prost was also very good in 1990 as well. That Ferrari wasn't... I mean, in the hands of Nigel Mansell, it wasn't great. I don't think he even won a race in the hands of Nigel Mansell. Did he win a race? I'm probably just being brain dead. I probably missed like 1 or 2 races that Mansell won in 1990. But that was the year... Because Mansell left after 1990, didn't he? He left, so did Prost after 1990 because he said that the car handled like a truck. Not because the car just handled like a truck in general, because it handled like a truck when it didn't have power steering, which I thought was commonsensical. I said that in my Lewis Hamilton video. People saying, oh, well, you can't disrespect the Ferrari. Yes, you can, because if a car has no power steering when it's meant to have power steering, you know the difference. Especially a fucking Formula 1 car from the 90s that handles at fucking 180 miles an hour. How hard would it be to turn that wheel? 1991, Senna was, he was still at McLaren and he won his second title. Pretty dominant. I mean, Mansell came back towards the end of the season and then broke his foot in Adelaide, or ankle, or whatever it was in Adelaide, or toes. It was something around that sort of area. He broke in 91. Then in 92, he couldn't match Mansell in that fucking dominant Williams. Same with, I mean, Riccardo Patrese was ahead of him in the standings. That tells you a lot. But Senna proved. I mean, he was admirable in Monaco, where he held off Mansell. But even then, it was really easy to hold someone back at Monaco because of how tight the track was. 93, obviously, the Williams was less dominant. He had his good moments in Donington. He had his good moments in... where else did he win in 93? Adelaide. He won in Adelaide. He was good at street... Senna was always good at street circuits because he could get closer to the walls than anyone else, and he just had more control of the car than most of the people. And then, obviously, 94, got pole position in the first 3 races and crashed out, or he retired from all of them and then died in Imola. I do think that Senna would have won that title if he'd have not died. I think, obviously, Damon Hill had more. He had like 6 points after 3 races. Senna had 0. But also, I think Senna would have been more clutch because obviously Damon Hill was never really that clutch. The only time he ever really clutched a good result, I keep saying clutch, stop saying that. The only time he ever got a properly good result on his pure merit, beating Michael Schumacher, was in Suzuka. I think Senna would have completely, not obliterated Schumacher, but I think he would have given him a lot better run for his money in 94 and would have won the title before Adelaide. If Williams was as good as it was in 95, then I would think he would have also probably won 95. I mean, he would have been close between him and Schumacher because obviously the Williams wasn't as good as the Benetton in 95. And then in 96 and 97, the Williams was the best car on the grid. I mean, Damon Hill won the Williams by considerable margins, and I mean, Hill lost to Jacques Villeneuve. He nearly lost to Jacques Villeneuve, who was a rookie. That's embarrassing. And Jacques Villeneuve himself proved after his Williams stint that he wasn't that good a driver either. Senna could have retired with at least 6 championships. I mean, if he'd have stayed on for... Obviously, he wouldn't have done well at Williams in 98 and 99. By then, he could have moved to Ferrari and been alongside Schumacher and tried to fight for titles with Schumacher. You could say he could go until 2000, where he'd have been like 40 years old. But that's all conjecture. I mean, he could have won 6, 7 titles if everything had gone his way. But yeah, it's a shame that Senna died, obviously. 5th on my list is Niki Lauda. Along with the Hamilton being 7th, Niki Lauda being 5th is what shocks most people. And the reason I say Lauda over Senna, over Hamilton, is because Lauda won every single title that he could have won. I mean, people say, 76, but 76, after that accident, I don't think he was in contention for that title. I think, yes, he was leading and stuff, but he literally had half his face burned off. No one has had that severe injuries in F1 history and challenged for a title. I mean, you could say Mansell in 92 because he had, a broken toe for the entire season, but it was in such a dominant car. That McLaren in 76 was just as good as the Ferrari, especially towards the end of the season. I think, yeah, that obviously great story, great season, but Lauda burned half his face off. How do people expect him to win the title? And then in Fuji, obviously, I think if he'd have stayed, I think if he hadn't have retired in Fuji, he would have won the title because obviously it dried up. Because the reason why he retired in Fuji was because he was like, it's too wet, it's too dangerous. But it dried up. I think if he'd have carried on for a little bit longer, I think he'd have actually won the title because he'd have finished in the top 6 at least and not handed the title to Hunt on a plate. But going back to his earlier career, he started off with BRM. Was it March or BRM? BRM rings a bell. It was 72, wasn't it? Because he obviously had Regazzoni as his teammate for 73 and then moved to Ferrari for 74 with Regazzoni as his teammate again and outperformed Regazzoni. I mean, he was second in the championship, wasn't he, in 74 behind Fittipaldi, who'd moved to McLaren. 75 won it at a cakewalk. 76 was on course to win it at a cakewalk when he got burned half alive. 77 won by a cakewalk, even though he missed the last 2 races of the season because he didn't like how Ferrari was running anymore. 78 performed well in the Brabham, even though it wasn't. I mean, he had John Watson as his teammate again, another great driver, and he beat John Watson quite considerably, from what I remember. From what I remember, I wouldn't have been born for another 30 years, but still, well, not 30 years, 25 years, but 78 was good. 79 was 79 was when he retired. Whoops. Or was he? No, did he retire midway through 1979, or did he retire at the end of 1970? I think he retired midway through 1979. First time, anyway. Obviously, took a couple of years out, got Lauda Air running. 1982 was when he came back with McLaren because Marlboro wanted a world champion, and they couldn't get anyone else. I assume they couldn't get Alan Jones, who'd retired. I assume they couldn't get Piquet because he was obviously at Brabham. Obviously couldn't get Scheckter because he'd retired. Obviously couldn't get Andretti because he was at Alfa Romeo and stuff like that. But yeah, they got Lauda instead, and Lauda, I mean, he was very good to start with. I mean, he won in, what was it, Long Beach? But no one really got off the ground in that season. And I mean, he wasn't embarrassed by Watson, but he was outperformed by Watson in 1982. Obviously, I mean, how old was Lauda when he returned? Was he like born in 1949? So he came, he was only, I suppose, he was only 34, so he wasn't old when he returned to F1. So he retired aged like 30. That's interesting. He retired the first time aged like 30. That's the most Niki Lauda thing ever. Don't care about getting loads and loads of titles. You just care about being safe and not wanting to drive in circles all the time. That's fair enough. That's the most Niki Lauda thing ever. I don't remember anything of Lauda's 1983 season. I mean, Watson, I think, he obviously got the win in Long Beach. But I think Lauda was just unlucky more than anything. And then 1984 obviously came up against Prost and was instantly like... I mean, he wasn't dominant. Prost and him were both very equal throughout the season. Prost was unlucky, you could say, because obviously he got the half points win at Monaco, which would have won him the title. But that was also his own fault, because he literally said to the clock, or he literally was waving to the clock, because stop the race, I'm going to get beat by some random Brazilian. No, stop it. So that's his own fault. He brought it upon himself. But Lauda was admirable in 1984. That's why, for example, why I put Lauda above both Senna and Hamilton, because Senna got beat by Prost as a teammate. He got beat by, he didn't beat De Angelis by much. He didn't beat Prost by much, even when he did win. Even in the seasons he did win against Prost, he would have lost in other circumstances. I mean, he was better than Berger, he was better than Andretti, he was better than Hill, obviously. But that's why I put Lauda over Senna and Hamilton, because Senna and Hamilton got beat by their teammates, and Prost didn't, apart from John Watson, when he'd had 3 years out of the sport and was coming back. And he didn't embarrass himself against Watson either. So, yeah, that's why I put Lauda in my top 5. Most people are probably going to disagree with that, but that's fine. If you want to disagree, put it in the comments and get me some more interactions. We are an hour into recording. But I doubt anyone's going to be listening at this point. This is going to be a podcast. 4th on my list, best drivers ever, Michael Schumacher. Michael Schumacher, for me, he's very good, 7-time world champion. Unlike Hamilton, didn't get beat by his teammate, apart from Rosberg in 2010 to 2012. I mean, he got beat by Piquet technically in 91, but that was because he did half a season and Piquet did the full season. 92, up against Brundle, he didn't embarrass Brundle. Brundle held himself up well as an upper midfield caliber driver, but Schumacher was obviously very good. 93, obviously came up against Patrese. Patrese was good, but Schumacher was far better. 94, Schumacher was the best driver that season. He won like a billion races, got banned for 4 races, or banned or excluded from 4 races, banned or disqualified from 4 races. 95 showed why Hill was just a massive fraud. 96 moved to Ferrari and was building on the team from 96 to 99. Came close in 98 and 99. Obviously, in 99 he broke his leg. I mean, if Irvine can nearly win a title, then Schumacher would have won that title quite easily, because obviously Hakkinen made about 40 billion mistakes. 2000, he came up against Hakkinen and Coulthard a little bit as well, but finally won that title with Ferrari. 2001, obviously, won the title. I mean, it was a bit closer because he had, who was it as his rival that year? Did he really have one? I mean, he had Montoya, who was winning races. He had Coulthard and Hakkinen, who were winning races. Barrichello, I don't think, won a race in 2001, although he did in 2000. 2002, obviously, was much more centralised on Ferrari. I mean, Barrichello was not a threat, especially at Austria. 2003, obviously had Mike Raikkonen and Montoya. That obviously makes him a lot easier to... That was probably his closest title fight in his Ferrari years. 2004, obviously, wiped the floor with everyone. 2005, still performed well in a 3rd fastest or 2nd fastest car, obviously. Got his win at Indy, which was unfair. Obviously a bit rigged. Not rigged, but very much an unfair victory. 2006, performed admirably. That Ferrari was not as good as the Renault of that year. And obviously Schumacher was pushing... Oh, he was 37. It's not old man territory, but it is getting to the end of your career territory. And obviously he retired after that season. Came back 2010. I mean, 2010 cars were way different to the 2006 cars. A lot more aero-based, a lot more aero-dependent. Tyres were a big thing when they weren't in 2006. Obviously, you had Bridgestone and Michelin, but in terms of actual how important it was to grasp how the tyres worked, it was a lot less. You could say you could be a good driver who just didn't know how to do the tyres in 2006 and still do decently well. And we couldn't do that in 2010. Obviously, came back. Rosberg was obviously a much younger driver, much more impressionable, much more recent experience. Obviously, was with Williams the previous seasons. Schumacher came back, and Schumacher didn't make a fool of himself. He had his moments of real amazement. He was good in the wet. He was good at certain qualifying sessions. He was good at certain races. As I said, in 2010, there was no real standout moments apart from blowing up. Who was it in Singapore? Because he did it 2 years in a row. Oh, it was 2011 because he did it 2 years in a row. I think he did it to Buemi and then Verne in consecutive years. Or was it Sutil and then Verne? It might have been a Force India, I don't know. It might have been Liuzzi, actually. 2011 obviously had his moments. He had like Canada 2011 where he was like Canada that year where he was running like second for like part of a race and then fell back to fifth. 2012 obviously was the main part of his comeback moments. Monaco pole position and the podium at Valencia. I mean, yeah, he was still a good driver in his Mercedes stint. He just wasn't as good a driver. And you got to think, coming back after 3 years, like Lauda did that, and he was up against like people like John Watson, and he wasn't embarrassed by Watson, but he wasn't as good. And Schumacher was just the same. And bearing in mind, age was a lot more of a determining factor in the 2010s. And also, he had no racing experience in those years. Like, he did like motorbike racing for Ferrari in 2009, some sort of motorbike racing, which obviously stopped him from returning to Ferrari. But he had no experience. I mean, he did probably a few tests at Fiorano, obviously, to try and see if he could get back to that seat for Massa. If he'd have stayed, there are rumours that he could have stayed on for 2013 and 2014. Obviously, he would have never had his accident, probably. He might have, because obviously they still take their winter breaks. But I think he would have won a couple of races in 2013. And people say, oh, he would have won a championship in 2014. That is a massive stretch. He would have been, 45 in 2014. Like, I know some drivers don't age as much as others, but he was already showing signs of his old age in 2010 to 2012. He made a couple of stupid mistakes, like I said, in Singapore in those couple of instances. And I think his age would have exacerbated those problems because he would have just kept getting older and kept getting worse. It's a shame that we can't talk to him nowadays, obviously. It's a shame that he is in the state he is. But Schumacher is fourth for me. He's ahead of Hamilton. He's ahead of Senna because he's not been beaten by a teammate ever, apart from Rosberg. But that was less his fault and less more of a situation he was in. Third for me is Alain Prost. He, similar to Schumacher, only ever got beaten by a teammate, or similar to Lauda, should I say, and Senna, only got beaten by a teammate once. Came into McLaren in 1980. He was against, who was he against? It might have been John Watson, actually. But I don't think John Watson outperformed him. I think he only got like one more point than him or something stupid like that. 1981, obviously moved to Renault. Was it Arnoux as his teammate or was it Jabouille as his teammate? It might have been No, it was Arnoux, I think. And he performed well. He was in the. I think he could have won the title if Renault hadn't have been the yellow teapot. And the same in 82. He could have been. He won the first two races of the season and was leading the championship for like half the season because hardly anyone was scoring points because everyone was busy retiring from all the races. He was leading for like half the season despite only finishing like 2 races or only scoring points in 2 races, which was really funny. 1983 was similar. Again, he was like second in the championship because Renault couldn't provide him with a good car. Moved to McLaren in 84. Challenged Lauda all the way. Didn't win it in the end. I mean, as I said, he only got beaten by one teammate, Senna, but he technically got beat by Lauda. I mean, half a point, but come on. 1985 obviously beat his teammate. Who was his 85? It would have been Lauda again. Lauda again was his teammate, and he wasn't that good. He only got 1 race win compared to Prost, but again, like 4 or 5. Prost never really had a title fight. He had Michele Alboreto was kind of in it, but he wasn't at the same time. 86, much more of a bigger title fight because Williams was a better car than the McLaren, or at least they had 2 competitive drivers. Because obviously Rosberg was in the other car for McLaren, and Rosberg, great driver. Is it like I think he won a couple of he won like a race or 2. But he admitted he was number 2 to Alain Prost. I think in build up to the Adelaide race, he said, if I need to hold up Rosberg or if I need to hold up PK or Mansell, I'll do it. I'll be the subservient number 2 because I'm about to retire and I don't want to take anything away from Alain, which is obviously a very generous gesture from the man there. What other ones I got? 1987. I mean, he was still at McLaren, but McLaren weren't that good. Obviously, Williams was far better. Lotus was good as well. I think he had Stefan Johansson as his teammate that year, and he just wasn't that good. Obviously, Senna came in for 88, and they were both dominant. Senna won it the first year, Prost won it the second year. I mean, we've already discussed this in Senna's bit, because their careers are basically intertwined. 1990 moved to Ferrari because he thought McLaren were favouring Senna or something along those lines, or he couldn't work with Senna because he was dangerous. I mean, he was just being a French complainer, but he was always good at playing the politics game, and that's why he moved to Ferrari. Didn't work out at Ferrari. Obviously, nearly won the title in 1990. He didn't even win a race in 91 because the car was dog shit. 92 obviously took the sabbatical. Came back in 93, ousted both Mansell and Patrese and Senna to get the Williams seat in 93. Won the championship with Damon Hill as his teammate. Not hard, it's like taking candy from a baby. And then obviously retired again. I mean, he had rumours of coming back for Ligier and Prost about 5,000 times, but as much as I like to rib him for being a politician and for being like a really like a really salty and at times unkind and not forgiving, an unforgiving race driver, he was brilliant at what he did. Like, you pick someone to... I've always said, if you want to pick someone to win a race, you pick Senna. If you want to pick someone to win a championship, you pick Prost. Because Prost was the better driver. Prost knew, first of all, how to play the politics game, and he knew how to play being consistent better than Senna did. Senna would push 100 laps out of 100 laps. Prost would push 95% for all of those 100 laps and get just as good results. Because people say, oh, Senna was so much better in qualifying and Senna was so much faster. He wasn't, actually. Apart from like Monaco 1988 and a couple of like when he would go like a second quicker than Prost, he wasn't like on average in a normal qualifying session he was probably like maybe a couple of tenths, maybe a tenth or two off, which considering Senna's record is pretty impressive. Prost was very underrated in my opinion, especially by people who just dick ride Senna for no reason. Second for me is Fangio. Fangio, for me, obviously, completely different era to everyone we've talked to, even about Graham Hill. Graham Hill is probably the earliest we've gone through. But Fangio, obviously, he could have won more titles than he actually had. Obviously, 1950 took Farina to the wire and then had an engine failure, or it was some sort of problem in Monza which stopped him from being able to compete in the last race, or being able to finish the last race. He could have won that title. 1951 obviously won the title. 1952 he broke his neck before the season started and couldn't compete. From there on in, he had he still had an after problem with that broken neck. He couldn't turn his head while he was driving. That's crazy. He literally had to just sit straight and just drive along without turning his head. That is mental to me. Driving those cars without being able to turn your head would have probably been very scary. 53, he won a few races with Maserati, but then moved to Mercedes midway through the 54 season and won a couple of races. I think he's the only driver to win a race or win a championship while driving for two different teams in the season. Obviously won the 54 championship not quite considerable. I mean, Gonzalez was there, but he wasn't. And in 1955, he had Moss as his teammate, washed Moss out of the park, really. Let him win at Aintree. I mean, I think he let him win. People will say, oh, he didn't let him win, but I think he did let him win. 1956, moved to Ferrari because he knew they'd have the best car, even though he didn't like Enzo Ferrari, which is fair enough. 1957, with Maserati, obviously won. I mean, as I said, he could have won 1950. He could have won probably 1952 and 53 if he didn't break his neck. He could have been like an 8-time world champion or a 7-time world champion. But yeah, for me, Fangio, I mean, the reason why he's not number one is because he doesn't really have any standout moments. Like, when you think of, as I said, when you think of Senna, you think of 88 Monaco qualifying, you think of Donington, you think of Jerez qualifying, you think of all the different Monaco qualifying, you think of all the different races. Prost, you think of, I'm trying to think of Prost races. That's maybe not a good idea because he doesn't really have any standout performances. Mexico, 1990, where he was like, started like 13th and made his way up through the grid. And then you have like Mansell at Silverstone and stuff like that. Fangio only really had 57 Germany. Maybe that's because races were less well documented back then, and so if he had a good performance, it was less likely to be known because all you see is the results, and he won by like, let's say if he won by like a second, but he had to make like a 1 minute gap up, you wouldn't see it because it just didn't document. Maybe that's the reason. But that's the reason for me why he's not number one, because he doesn't have many standout moments compared to number one, which is, in my opinion, Jim Clark. Jim Clark, for me, had the most natural talent of any driver. Not just, this isn't just on pure natural talent, obviously, because we talked about Prost with politics and stuff. But Clark obviously came into F1 in 1960, driving for Lotus. I mean, he got a couple of podiums in 1960 and in 61. 62 was really when he started. I think he's 62. I can't remember. Did he win his first race at the Nürburgring or Spa or something like that? Started winning races. Then in 1963, wiped the floor with everyone, got 100% of the points. Even if he didn't win every single race, he still got 100% of the points. 64 was looking like he was going to win the title, and I think he had an engine failure with like 2 laps to go in 64 and would have won the title. 65 won the title by an absolute margin, even though he buggered off to do the Indy 500 instead of going to Monaco. 66, obviously 67, the Lotus was shit and it was unreliable and not the best car. even on raw performance. So he only won like 1 or 2 races then. And then 68 obviously won the opening round and then died at Hockenheim in F2 before he could compete and win another title. I think he would have won at least 5 titles, possibly even 6. Because you look, he could have won 68. That would have been 3, obviously. Could have won 1970 because obviously that's when Lotus were back in competitive again. He could have won what Rindt won. He could have won the title that Fittipaldi won in 70. If he'd have stayed at Lotus, I think he could have won. But to be fair, Lotus had a bit of an off period after 72, didn't they? So maybe he would have gone to McLaren or he would have gone to Brabham or some other team. And I think if he'd had to have stayed with Lotus, I think he would have stayed on until like 1978, 1979, 1980, even though he would have been like 40-something because he was dedicated to Colin Chapman. Obviously, he died when he was 32, so that would have been in 1980, he would have been like 45, 46, but it's Jim Clark. He had the natural ability, I think, to go into his 40s and 50s. Maybe not 50s, but he could have definitely gone into his mid-40s. Could have been a 5-time, 6-time champion. But yeah, I'm glad I didn't do a script for this, because if I'd have had to do a script this long, it would have been literally hours, and I've spent hours writing it. So if you're still here at the end of this video, you deserve a fucking medal, because I couldn't listen to myself talk for an hour and 20 minutes. Tell me what you think. Do you think I'm right? Do you think I'm wrong? Do you think that I put certain drivers too low? Do you think I put certain drivers too high? Do you think I didn't mention it? Actually, we'll do some honourable mentions as well. I mean, Verstappen is 11th on the list for me. He needs. I think it's recency bias that's really knocking him down for me, because obviously Jackie Stewart, we have a legacy that extends past his racing career. We have Graham Hill again, whose legacy extends past his racing career. But with Verstappen, obviously, we've just seen what he can do now. Red Bull could be shit from 2024 onwards, and he could never win a championship again, and he'd look less favourable, which is why I don't want to put him on this list just yet. I think if he wins his 4th title, he definitely does belong in the top 10. It's a hard list to get into, because if Jackie Stewart is the benchmark, you can't really say that it's an easy list to get into. Vettel's probably in there as well. He's probably 12th. You got Nigel Mansell. He was a very good driver, although he only won 1 title. He obviously was very good. Sterling Moss even gets into the top 15 probably, because although he didn't win a championship, he was definitely in the shout for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 titles. Keke, I mean, you could pretty much go through any world champion and say they deserve to be in here somehow. Maybe apart from Phil Hill and Mike Hawthorne and people like that. But yeah, that's what I'm going to say. And maybe Damon Hill and Jacques Villeneuve, less said about those two, the better, because I really don't think they were world championship caliber drivers. But yeah, tell me what you guys think. My voice is, I can already feel that my voice is going shit. So, see you all later. Shout out to all my channel members. Shout out to everyone who's subscribed. Shout out, like, comment, and subscribe. Shout out to everyone who's subscribed. And shout out to Andy Lamberts, who's my only channel member. If you want to get perks like he does, emojis next to your name and stuff like that, and early access to videos. This will probably come out early for channel members. You can pay £3 a month. £3 a month is the minimum price. But if you want to, like, for example, do racing with me, because I do a lot of sim racing. If you want to do sim racing with me, or you want to just talk to me in general, I could definitely do that if you were to pay up to £8 a month. But obviously, I understand that we're in a cost of living crisis, and in the UK we are anyway, and I can understand people not wanting to spend expenses where they don't want to. So anyway, I've been Nedzo, and I'll see you all later. Bye! Yeah, I went from boring, monotonous voice to bye! It's great, I can do that. Thank you everyone for listening. I'm been Nedzo, I'll see you all later. I don't know what to say now. Bye.